Hello. So I wanted to go over the changes that have been made to the cards finally. Yesterday, in light of the trailer dropping, I was severely inspired to push out all the new design aspects as fast as possible. So we have our final layouts. What you're seeing here is one of the original layouts, and it's actually the card that I was modeling everything off of at the beginning. And I'm going to go over the changes that were made in addition to the overall look of the cards and let everybody be able to see. So first we have our old style. The old style indicated the color of the card with the banner. It also indicated it with the symbology on the card, and the value was listed here. The name, the subname, the type lines, and the effect and flavor text of the card. The outside edge represented the tier of the card, whether it was gold, silver, or bronze, and then all the information that was critical to like collector purposes and stuff like that is at the bottom. But I saw this and I loved it 2.5 years ago. I went through a full thing wanting to adjust things, and we have our new results. So the next card is one of the few ones that I've completely one-to-one converted into the newer style, but I will be able to show other edits that were made. So without further ado, this is how the cards look now. I'm going to drag this one down here for a side-by-side comparison to just give you a little bit of perspective of what all has changed on the cards. So let's do a side-by-side here. And we'll get on to the next bit after that. So for the side-by-side, we've already seen everything on this, and this is what the newer cards look like. I have shown this to a number of my friends, and they say it looks overall significantly cleaner and looks better overall. So, for instance, we have everything is pretty much the same information on this card. There's only 2 additions that have been made that are very obvious, and that's up here in the top right corner. And then past that, there were some aesthetic changes that were strictly put in to streamline the read of the card overall. So the first bit is our banners are much more banner-esque, much more banner-like. They don't look like they're just hanging from nowhere. There's actually a pole running across the top of the card that indicates where we have a hanging banner. We also don't have an expansion of the filigree and the lattice material. We have another hanging banner to indicate the color of the card. So we have 2 points with banners hanging down. This indicates the name, the subname, and then on the right we have our biggest 2 new additions. We have a nation banner. Now, to emphasize this to people, the nation banner is it has 2 points. The first bit is that it familiarizes people with the nation that a character in particular is coming from. This also gives you a little bit of lore in that sense, where you can know that this character comes from this nation. But in addition to that, that nation banner may change on characters based on where they are in the story. To give a brief spoiler, there will be a spoiler warning in the thing for this. For instance, I may make a Galad card. He will be dedicated to Andor and the first few sets. Galad being Elaine's brother, and Gawain's brother. But later on in the story, he becomes a White Cloak. So despite being dedicated to Andor and raised in Andor, in those aspects he will have the White Cloak banner shown there, or the Children of the Light banner, as opposed to the Andoran banner. And this will change periodically throughout the story based on the characters' growth as the story progresses. Underneath that, we have a new system called resources, or in a sense, the channeling strength of a character that is a channeler. So rather than indicate in the type bar that a character is a channeler, they will have 2 different symbols located here. These 2 different symbols are either the saidin or the saidar symbol. These are represented by the Flame of Tar Valon, and they're represented by the dragon's fang. So if a character is a channeler with saidin, they will have the dragon's fang. If they're a channeler with saidar, they will have the Flame of Tar Valon listed there. What this does is it gives the characters a dedicated resource system that they can utilize for cards like weaves, like channeling weaves. And it also does not take away from the character's overall power until this resource bar is depleted. I am still working out and troubleshooting whether or not a expent channeler, like a channeler that has no further resources, will be able to tap into their own power, to like their own life, to be able to channel, but it is up for discussion. But aside from these changes, there will also be one other change, and strictly for the purposes of this video, I will show you, but this is not what the card would look like in a normal sense. So we also have armor listed on cards now in this top left corner. So if a character has armor, which was introduced in the 4th set of the game when I was initially creating it, armor works as like a buffer. So having armor on a unit means that the armor will be reduced before the character's power stat. So the power represents how strong the character is on the table and whatever influence they're giving. The armor represents something that must be removed before you can get to the actual character. So if a character has armor, you have to pay attention to this and remove it before you can get the character off the table. But aside from that, we move on to the next bit, which is down here in the bottom. So for a long time, I went with having things in brackets and would have very clear text to identify when a card was playable or when an effect was usable. In the old sense, over here, as you can see, I put when played on the card, and then carried out the entire effect of the card. This has now been replaced with symbology, and this will also be replaced on multiple other things. So, for instance, instead of having the when played text on a card, you will now have a green lightning bolt circle symbol listed on the card. This tells you the timing that this card's effect happens, which in this case is instantly. As soon as this card hits the table, the effect resolves. Past that, we also have the red skull, which represents when destroyed. Then you have the while in play, which is the yellow wheel. And then we have when revealed, which is a orange with an eye in the center. And we also have while in the hand, which is blue with a fan of cards. And finally, when shuffled is an arrow under purple, stating that if the card is shuffled back into the deck, you resolve an effect. These so far are the symbols, the symbology, the 6 symbols that will be used on cards to represent things in the future. Beneath that, we have a clear line that also follows suit with the tier of the card, and it shows the flavor text of the card. This is a clear separation so that anybody is not completely overwhelmed by a card. If I choose to include a ton of lore on a card or a lot of text or a quote from the book, I don't want people to be intimidated thinking that the card is extremely complex or difficult to read or comprehend. Beneath that, this is one of the changes that I decided to do. As you can see in the previous example over here, there was lattice work on the bottom and lattice work on the top. I have removed that. The reason why is to expand the frame of the card so where you get a little bit more height on the picture, and also to give you a very clear line at the bottom, and this is across every type of card now. Very clear black line at the bottom indicating the important text for collectors, meaning the set of the card, the number of the card, as well as finally the artist's credit and then the year it was created. So all of this is the changes that were done to the primary unit cards, which make up a bulk of the game. So I want people to be able to see these the most, and overall I think they turned out spectacular. And moving on to the next bit, we will get into item cards. So I'm going to go ahead and close out old Rand here and put my new Rand back up here where he needs to be, and we'll move into item cards. So previously this was an example of how I did item cards. This was a gold and the first of the weave cards that I ever designed, which was Balefire, again from Dragon Reborn. I have not completely redesigned this card yet, so the next picture is going to be very blank and a little confusing, but I want to at least showcase what I've done when it comes to item cards with the overall new change and aesthetic. So the first bit is we have this. So what I've done is I've added a few new things to item cards that will only be there if they're on weave cards, which double kind of as item cards. They're not necessarily. So items and weaves are in the same category. They have no hanging banner, and they are playable out of your hand on the turn. So that's why I've elected to do this. So first bit is unlike New Rand that we were looking at, this is actually a completely centered banner, but it is exactly the same size. And you can clearly see the hanging rod now. And past that, we have the weave, the weavings that I had included in the card design for weaves. So these weaves will disappear if a card is not a weave. So if it's an item, you will not see these. And also, if it's an item, you will not see them. You will not see these resource requirements here. This was one of the changes that I elected to do, which is that if a weave is played, it will show a different ratio for Saidar or Saidin that must be used in order to access the weave. And you have to use it from a character. So what this means is that your channelers are like having little resource pieces on the table that you have to then siphon their power in order to utilize the magics of the game. And for certain instances, like cards like healing, it may cost next to nothing for a Saidar unit to use it, but for a Saidin to use it, it may be substantially more expensive. Because, as portrayed in the books, males are not as talented with water and air as females. But for instance, cards like Dahmer Flynn, which is a character later on in the story, he may have an ability that says, if you attempt to cast a healing weave, it costs 0 for him or something like that. This also expands into more design space and gives you aspects like, certain characters having traits that are, more indicative of their characters in the book. But past the symbology for the need of resources, if we were to not have a character like that, I could take off the resource costs. And I could also take off the excess symbology for them. And by doing this, I have effectively turned this into an item card. So with an item card, item cards are going to be exactly what they were in the initial set, which is they would sit and they would take up the place of a turn. They have the same exact information that, we had on the last card, where, one, they don't have flavor text. That's always been a constant across all items. But when it comes to the thing, it'll be the name, the subname of the item, the type of the item, and then finally the effect of the card. So between all of these, we also have that black bottom, that blacking at the bottom to make sure that everything is legible at the bottom. And finally, the color of the card or tier, just like every other card, is represented by the outside edge as well as the framing of the card. And finally, we have our updated environments and weaves. So this is what environments used to look like, and this is what weaves of the pattern used to look like. Fairly simple. They were either left aligned or right aligned cards. They went on either side of the table based on the setup of the game, and they pretty much told you, here's how you win, and here's what this row does different. So that was the first bits. But what I've done now is added that black barring to the bottom to make it cleaner for everybody to see. And also I've added a potential new thing. I hope you're listening, my people in chat, because this is the one thing that I haven't finally decided on, which is that environments may have a home field advantage type of trait, meaning that if I pick a card like the Two Rivers here, it would represent Andor, because it's in Andor, meaning that if you play a card that is Andoran on the Two Rivers, it would contribute to something similar to what they do with commander damage and magic, which is, even if the card has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not it's able to claim the territory, for instance, in this case, you need 13 combat and 13 knowledge, in order to claim 2 rivers. If you had, say, 4 Andorran units in a row or something like that, you would automatically lay claim to the territory if the opponent did not take it by the end of the next turn. I'm not sure if I'm going to implement this. I can easily remove the flags, but the idea is there. And with a visual indicator like having the flags on each of the unit cards, it makes it kind of like another little sub mini game that you can either build strategies around or decks around. But I worry that it's going to introduce more meta tactics, but we'll see. The point is that I also added the old filigree. So out of all the card types, the only ones that got the filigree were the environments and the hazards. So to show this, I'm going to showcase now what the hazards look like. Of course, the art's upside down, but hazards are just the opposite way. So overall, this is the changes that I have made to the game. I'm hoping that this will result in more design space and more creativity coming from me, and I hope that this will encourage me to make the game more fun and more invested with people that want to sit down and try it out. I hope that the visual indicators on the cards make it cleaner. I hope that the overall, design process gets simpler and the consistency becomes the biggest part of everything. The next step with all this is actually re-spreadsheeting every single card with the new possible aspects in the game, and then proceeding to the final development phase, which is remaking all 400 original cards and then producing the new 100 cards for Fires of Heaven, all which has to be done by the middle of next January. Hooray! Either way, I hope that this video was at least entertaining, and I hope that the new card designs look really, really awesome. And here's to the future. Have a good rest of the day.